Hello guys, today I'm going to talk about microprocessors. So first of all, let's talk about different uh, microprocessor, the evolution of microprocessors. So there are various kinds of microprocessors from 4-bit to 64-bit microprocessors. So we'll be looking at each of the microprocessors, their evolution. So the first microprocessor is Intel 4004. It was introduced in 1971. It was the first microprocessor by Intel. It was a 4-bit microprocessor and its clock speed was 740 kHz. The second microprocessor is Intel 4040. It was introduced in 1974. It was also a 4-bit microprocessor and its clock speed was 500 kHz. Then we have Intel 8-bit 8008. It was introduced in 1972. It was 8-bit microprocessor. Its clock speed was 500 kHz and could execute 50,000 instructions per second. Then we have 8080 microprocessor. It was introduced in 1974. It was also a 8-bit microprocessor. Its clock speed was 2 MHz. It had 6000 transistors, was 10 times faster than 8008 and could execute 5 lakh instructions per second. You could see that as we are evolving, the instructions per second are getting more and more faster, and also it's getting faster. Then we have the Intel 8085. It was introduced in 1976. It was also an 8-bit microprocessor. Its clock speed was 3 MHz. Its data bus is 8-bit and address bus is 16-bit. It had 6500 transistors and could execute 7,69,230 instructions per second. It could access 64 kilobyte of memory and it had 246 instructions. Then we have the 16-bit microprocessor. It is an Intel 8086 microprocessor. So it was introduced in 1978. It was the first 16-bit microprocessor. Its clock speed is 4.77 MHz, 8 MHz and 10 MHz depending on the availability. Its data bus is 16-bit and address bus is 20-bit. It had 29,000 transistors and could execute 2.5 million instructions per second. It could access 1 MB of memory. It had 22,000 instructions. Then we have Intel 8088. It was introduced in 1979. It was also a 16-bit microprocessor. It was created as a cheaper version of 8086. It was a 16-bit microprocessor with an 8-bit external bus. Then we have Intel 80186 and 80188, introduced in 1982, and they were 16-bit microprocessor. Clock speed was 6 MHz. Then we have Intel 80286. It was introduced in 1982. It was 16-bit microprocessor. Its clock speed was 8 MHz. Then we have Intel 80386, introduced in 1986. It was first 32-bit microprocessor. Its data bus is 32-bit and address bus is 32-bit. It could address 4 GB of memory. Then we have Intel 80486, introduced in 1989. It was also 32-bit microprocessor. It had 1.2 million transistors. Its clock speed varied from 16 MHz to 100 MHz depending upon various versions. Then we have Intel Pentium and Intel Pentium Pro. It was introduced in 1993. It was also 32-bit microprocessor. It was originally named 80586. Its clock speed was 66 MHz. And Intel Pentium Pro, which was a 32-bit microprocessor, which was introduced in 1995. Then we have Intel Pentium 2 and Xeon. Intel Pentium 2 introduced in 1997. It was also 32-bit microprocessor, and we have Intel Xeon processor, which was used for servers those days, is also 32-bit microprocessor. Then we have Intel Pentium 4. So it was introduced in 2000. It was also a 32-bit microprocessor. Then we have Intel Pentium dual core, which was introduced in 2006. It is 32-bit or 64-bit microprocessor. It has two cores. Both the cores have their own internal bus and L1 cache, but share the external bus and L2 cache. Then we have 64-bit microprocessor. It was introduced in 2006. It is a 64-bit microprocessor. Introduced in 2008, it is a 64-bit microprocessor. Intel Core i5 versus Intel Core i3. Introduced in 2009, it is a 64-bit microprocessor, and introduced in 2010, it is a 64-bit microprocessor. So in this playlist we will be talking about 8085 microprocessor features. Intel 8085 is an 8-bit microprocessor. It is a 40-pin IC package fabricated on a single large-scale integration chip. That is, there will be a chip and there will be 40 pins in it. So Intel 8085 uses a single 5-volt DC supply for its operation. Its clock speed is about 3 MHz. It has 16-bit address bus and hence can address up to 2 raised to 16, that is 65,536 bytes, that is 64 kilobytes of memory location through A0 to A15. The first 8 lines of address bus and 8 lines of data bus are multiplexed, that is AD0 to AD7. Data bus is a group of 8 lines D0 to D7. It has 246 basic instructions and 74 opcodes. So that is the main features of the 8085 microprocessor, and we'll be talking in detail about all these. So now let us talk about the control signals. So there are some control signals which are the signals which are used to operate the microprocessor. So what is memory read? Memory read is a control signal which is used to read data or instruction from memory. Then we have memory write, that is we write data into the memory. Then we have IO read. It accepts data from the input device, that is the input device. It can be a keyboard or a mouse, so it is accepting that data. Then IO write, that is it sends data to the output device, for example a projector or a monitor, etc. So this is the bus structure of 8085. So as you can see here, this is the 8085 microprocessor. These are the address bus and this is the data bus. So as you can see here, the address bus is unidirectional, that is it is only going through one way, but the data bus is bidirectional, that is it is going in multiple ways. Okay, so we have memory here, then input here, output, data bus, control bus. So this is the basic structure of 8085. So that is all for today's video. I hope you understood about the main aspects of 8085, and in the next videos we'll be talking in detail about all these things. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.